This is System Crash. We're your hosts, Paris Marks.
And I'm Brian Merchant.
This week on the show, AI madness hits a new peak. Mark Zuckerberg has a plan to give everyone AI companions. Of course, we all need more friends, right? OpenAI's boardroom drama gets a new chapter with its planned restructuring as a private company, maybe not going forward as it was imagining. And the impact of AI on educational work has become a full-fledged disaster. Plus, Tesla sales continue to plummet. PBS Kids is defunded. Google wants its own white mirror to go against the black mirror, and so much more. This system has just begun to crash, so support the show by heading over to patreon.com/systemcrashpod, where you can sign up to get monthly bonus episodes. Also, rate the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Now, Brian, I have a big question for you to start off this week's episode. Do you drink coffee by chance?
Oh, occasionally. In recreational conditions, I like to consume a cup of coffee like my fellow humans. Why do you ask, Paris?
Well, maybe listeners have seen this, but Mark Zuckerberg did an interview on the Theo Von podcast. I think people have mixed opinions on Theo, but he's usually like a pretty personable person, right? He tries to kind of bring out, the best in people.
He's the guy that like Trump went on Theo Von, and like Theo Von like mentioned doing like cocaine or something on it, and Trump was like just like so interested, like Trump like turned it into an interview of like Theo Von. He's like, oh, that's interesting, like what?
Yeah,
so what is it, what so you get excited when you're on the cocaine?
Oh, it was fascinating, right? But yeah, so Zuckerberg goes on, and he's asked whether he likes coffee, and I think we just have to play the clip, right, so people can actually hear what he says.
Let's do it. Roll it.
You drink coffee, man, or no?
Nah.
Really?
Yeah,
I mean, you've had it.
I have. Sometimes on vacation, I'll drink it recreationally. It's like every once in a while.
Just like a celebration.
Yeah, no. It's
Really?
It's such an uncomfortable thing to listen to. Like, yeah.
It's like my least favorite Zuckerberg mode, where he's like in his like eager to please. He's like kind of like sitting up in his chair, and he's like, "Oh yeah, coffee. Well, I've heard of that, and sometimes I consume it myself." It's the classic like doing his best human impression kind of thing, right?
But I love how like he's talking about doing it recreationally while he's on vacation sometimes, and then like he laughs at himself, and Theo just seems like, "What is this guy?
What is this guy talking
Yeah.
about?" I gotta. You just get to save the coffee for the special occasion. I really, you don't want to see Zuck on too much coffee.
Absolutely not. No.
If anyone's seen this clip or heard about it, you probably heard about that. The headline was that Zuck was like there to sort of like boost Meta's AI plans, and he has given this quote that's now famous. He's like, most Americans only have 3 friends, and they want many more, up to 15. So we're gonna, generate
Americans
AI
are
friends.
sitting at their kitchen table and they're marking down their names. They're like, I only have 3, but my goal is 15. How am I going to find my other friends?
Somebody brought this up last night at this thing I was at, and they're like, this seems like a Mark problem, not an America problem. Just like, no, everybody has 3 friends. They have maximum 3 friends. No one has more than that, because if they did, then wouldn't more people be texting me back? And I don't know. I'm going to have to fill the gap.
He's not included in the group chats we were talking about last week.
3 friends, so that's 12 AI friends for the average American to get to that magic 15 number. But
it's like there has been this discussion in recent years, right, about how people do have fewer friends and how it can be bad for your health and all this kind of stuff. Like there's this whole kind of consequence of not having the same degree of like personal relationships for whatever reason in society. At least this is what the studies are like telling us and whatnot, right? And it's like, okay, maybe for some people, this is a legitimate problem, right? They are feeling more lonely in their lives and they are looking for greater connection. But the solution to that is not to give them AI friends. It's like to address the root of the issue.
Exactly. And, it's like absurd on its face, but it honestly is something that I run into a lot. Is like when I criticize AI or more publish something critical of AI, like that is a refrain. It's like, well, there's a loneliness epidemic and I use it to sort of feel less alone and feel a companionship. It's just one of those structural issues where it's like the headwinds are blowing so far against us that some people can take solace in these, AI companions or AI, or even just like ChatGPT. People chat with ChatGPT. There's a big story in the Rolling Stone last week. I don't know if you saw that, where people were like attributing sort of like mystical and religious attributes to ChatGPT, and like people obviously already unwell people, but there's all kinds of different issues that there was just like a recommendation that was handed down on like by a group of researchers that studied the effects of like AI companions on kids, and their recommendation was unequivocal. It was just like, kids should not be using these at all. Like, it should be banned because it's like so antisocial of like a proposition at its core, and they're so influenceable. They're so vulnerable to like all these, sometimes very strange things that the chat bots end up saying.
Well, and wasn't there that story not too long ago about the Meta chatbot that was talking to kids about like sex and stuff like that, like kind of sexualizing them?
Yeah, there was that, and that was the same thing that I think that was like part of the basis for this recommendation to just like ban under 16-year-olds from using them. I mean, there was that kid that so tragically was using character AI and chatting with this Game of Thrones, Dany Targaryen character who like took on and who became like he believed was his girlfriend, and then sort of subtly encouraged him to take his own life, and he did. And like, those are all extreme examples, and it is just like mind-boggling to me that like that anybody is even considering this after a decade of seeing what social media did to kids, and like finally getting around to banning, social media in schools and putting up, even just decent guardrails to this stuff, that now we're like, oh, look at this. Here's an AI startup that's going to make chatbots that our kids are like. I don't even know how that's how it's just not a non-starter.
Up here in Canada, Quebec just moved forward with a ban of phones in schools, and that follows a number of other provinces doing the same. But like, I completely agree with you, and I don't blame the people who are turning to the chatbots because they feel kind of desperate and lonely, right? They're just looking for some connection. It's the companies, and it's like, I think it's a really bad mark and sign of like where our societies are, that people feel they need to turn to these technological tools because there's no other form of connection that they can find, human connection, and we haven't like set up the ability to make those connections and to encourage community in the ways that I feel like maybe we had more in the past. And I think we really need our governments, and not like a federal government kind of thing, but like thinking about local governments and like local community groups, I think really need to be getting the funding to actually think about putting these types of things together to actually make it so people can come together more and are not just kind of communicating through social media platforms and talking to chatbots and all this kind of stuff that certainly benefits the tech companies, but is so like socially harmful.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's the classic sort of formulation where, the tech companies are taking advantage of the conditions that the previous iteration of tech companies, and sometimes they themselves, have nurtured, and they're exploiting this very fragmented online, addicted cohort that is quite vulnerable to all of this stuff. And, they recognize the opportunity here for more engagement, more time on screen, more ad sales eventually, of course. And so like all of that is just going to get plugged into this whole apparatus. None of that surprises me, right? Like, this is what the tech companies do. A lot of, these companies already have monopolistic or duopolistic controls over their platforms and their markets. But the fact, like, I'm not seeing as much resistance in a lot of cases. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of people speaking out and doing more, but just like, again, I just cannot believe that like that this company even has a shot. I guess a character AI was basically sort of acqui-hired and absorbed into Google. They're one of the sort of, to me anyways, least ethical AI, chatbot or companion companies. But it is more or less succeeding, right? Like, they're succeeding right now.
It also brings me back to like how when we think about the first chatbot, like all those decades ago that Joseph Weizenbaum put together, the thing that like turned him against AI. Yeah, exactly. Eliza was like seeing how people responded to it and how they wanted to like feel that it was human and that it was understanding and had much more meaning than was really there. And he knew that that was not the case. And like, he saw those warning signs like back in the 60s or whatever.
50 years ago. Yeah. 60 years ago.
Now we're like still grappling with it. Much more advanced today, obviously, far more advanced. But that doesn't mean that, they've gained a consciousness or something. It's just much better at fooling people.
Yeah, it is. It has more tools at its disposal, more like conversational options. But yeah, like when his colleague would like asked him to leave the room while he was using Eliza famously, and that response and responses like it was enough to just kind of set him on like the rest of his career basically was dedicated to criticizing or trying to push back at sort of the objectives and the core sort of suppositions of the AI industry and how it was taking root in the field of research. So he's really was quite prescient on a lot of that stuff.
But why we'll learn the lessons, right?
Yeah. Why would we learn a lesson if we can confront it anew decades later all over again? And there are many more. And in fact... that's going to be, I think, our through line theme this week is just this week was just like, I don't know.
AI onslaught of like bad AI stories. Yeah.
AI onslaught, just like a battering ram of one terrible AI story after another. We already mentioned two of them. There's Zuck's plans to, seed his platform with AI companions. And then there's this news that it was like, I think it was Common Sense Media and a Stanford lab that published that recommendation about kids and AI companion usage. But it's just been like one thing after another. And I do feel like we're hitting this threshold now where like the full weight and gravity of what AI, generative AI, sort of means as it has sunk in some very undeniable and hopefully not, but seemingly intractable ways in education, with regard to jobs, and with regard to the legal system. So we have three big stories to kind of dig into here, as well as looking at what OpenAI is up to and sort of, the systems and their flaws, which it's both of these things are happening at the same time. And it's hard for a lot of people to sort of hold these ideas, multiple ideas and truths about what AI is in their head at the same time. Like, how can it be this thing that is upending higher education and threatening thousands of jobs and, leading, like, just transforming elements of our trial system, and that the technology is still so fraught, so flawed, so capable of just producing falsehoods? How are both these things? And so we'll dig into all of that today, I'm sure. And a lot of it just comes down to the fact that there's questions of power and narrative, how much success Silicon Valley has had in sort of convincing everyone that AI is the future, because it has to be, otherwise they don't have any ideas else to fall back on. Does that all sound right to you, Paris?
Sounds about right. I figure we should start with OpenAI, right? Because it's the big corporate player, and then we can get into some of these bigger consequences of, the generative AI boom that Sam Altman and OpenAI have really pushed us on the past few years, right? Since ChatGPT was released near the end of 2022. And we have had this story for the past little while. We've discussed it on the show before about how OpenAI was looking to kind of shake off the limitations of being a nonprofit to kind of restructure as a private company so it could take advantage of, all of the financial interest and investment interest that has been associated with its company. We also know, though, that there have been attempts to stop this from happening by, what is often called the AI safety group, but also Elon Musk, who specifically sued to stop this from happening. In recent weeks, we have heard rumblings that this plan was probably going to be shelved because of how all of this opposition was going. But this week, we really got the confirmation that OpenAI is not going to move forward with this restructuring as a private company, is going to remain a nonprofit, but, there's still going to be some changes there, and not everyone is happy with them. So what are we seeing on that front, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting case, and there's still a lot of open questions. Like, for instance, OpenAI just inked this, historic funding round with SoftBank, the, Japanese conglomerate, and part of it was like for $40 billion for the latest investment, but part of that was predicated on OpenAI being able to navigate this and sort of get around this nonprofit structure. So, yeah, some long-term listeners might be aware that this is all kind of the result of OpenAI's weird and unique corporate structure and its original formation, and its sort of savvy play for sort of situating itself in the public imagination in a very specific way. And so OpenAI launched as a nonprofit research company, not as a for-profit commercial entity. It has since evolved, but it still is the case that there's like a nonprofit board that controls or that has like a majority voting share over the for-profit entity. And OpenAI has spent the last year or plus really trying to get around that, because it's like kind of a road bump to getting more capital and investment, or at least they saw it as that. It's kind of proven not to be immaterial because it's still landing all this cash.
Well, and particularly since, the short-lived ouster of Sam Altman, there has really been like an attack to ensure that board, is not oppositional to Sam Altman, but also doesn't have the power to do a whole lot to challenge his vision or do something that he doesn't want to do. There was actually a really interesting story in the Wall Street Journal a few weeks ago that was an excerpt from a recent book, and unfortunately I'm blanking on what the book was called, but it actually went into much more of the behind the scenes of what happened in that potential ouster. One of the things that I think it revealed that was not really in the conversation at the time, but was how Meera Marotti, who at the time I believe she was the CTO of the company, was actually working with these folks who were working on ousting Sam Altman because they found out that he was lying, he was, not a very good manager, was not treating people very well, was controlling this OpenAI startup fund that was supposedly, a company thing, but, it was actually Altman's sort of thing. But Meera was like feeding them information, had agreed to become the interim CEO once they pushed Altman aside. But because of everything that happened and the big backlash, once it occurred, she did not want to be associated with it. And she started campaigning for Altman to be returned as CEO, despite the fact that she helped oust him. And she was out herself not too long after. So, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this, and, Karen Howe's new book, Empire of AI, also sort of really clarifies a lot of this stuff, how all of this, like, AI safety and the need to keep it safe, and who's doing the most work to ensure AGI benefits all of humanity is really all just like the new sort of manifestation of like corporate skullduggery and wielding of power in the boardroom. It's all, famously sort of Dario Amodei, who was an early OpenAI employee, like defects to form Anthropic, because his AI company is going to be the super safest, and he made a big sort of splashy announcement that he's leaving because he's going to be safer. In reality, it's just like he wanted his team to have more power within the organization. He's an effective altruist guy who like really does, I think, believe that there's a material threat posed by AGI, but it is also neatly sort of dovetailed with the fact that like that justification should give him more power to determine, how the company builds its products and does its research. And so it's really just another power struggle. And so, all these things happening inside OpenAI, it really is. It's almost it is kind of comical. It's like darkly comical.
Can I just say, there's an interesting part of this Wall Street Journal piece, and just to be clear, it's from The Optimist, Sam Altman, OpenAI, and the Race to Invent the Future by Keech Hagee. Just if people wanted to kind of look it up.
Who has another book about OpenAI coming out? Yeah, there's going to be yeah.
Exactly. So in this piece, basically it discusses how Altman was at this dinner with Peter Thiel, and Peter Thiel was warning him that the company was being taken over by the EAs, the effective altruists, and like he needed to stop this like as quickly as possible, sort of a thing. Like, it's fascinating to look at this company and the developments for how it got here, right?
And I mean, it is funny. I mean, you don't gotta hand it to Peter Thiel.
No, you
as
absolutely
they
do not gotta
say.
hand it to him.
but yeah, I mean, if you are building a company, it does seem somewhat crazy to keep, just like funneling all of your money into sort of the AI safety research, or it wasn't even clear what the end goal was. I mean, it's such an interesting company for that reason. I've written a lot about OpenAI, I've written reports about it and dug into it. And it was, from Elon Musk's whole issue is because he's the co-founder of OpenAI. He and Sam Altman are kind of the two people who started it. And it was, it served a lot of purposes at the time for both men. It really, one big key part of it was Sam Altman was just purely opportunistic. He knew that Elon Musk was really into AI safety at the time and was worried about a super intelligence, going rogue and doing a Skynet or some, science fiction fantasy.
Of course, it's always a science fiction fantasy.
It's always a science fiction fantasy, but Sam Altman intuited that and basically parlayed that fear. And it's remarkable you can go back and read these emails between the men that have been sort of made public as part of the lawsuit that you mentioned. And OpenAI basically springs forth out of Sam Altman's opportunism, fully formed. And I think that's also a big reason why, Elon Musk took it so personally when Sam Altman did what Sam Altman does, and that's he ultimately marshaled the troops to his side. Elon Musk has been dancing between his companies, and he wanted full control of OpenAI, but Altman was canny enough to consolidate support, get Elon Musk out of there. So that's why they've been enemies forever. So Elon Musk has basically tried to throw up one roadblock after another after OpenAI got famous. Honestly, it's a big part of the reason that I think that this effort to sort of convert to a for-profit structure failed.
Yeah, he has been successful.
He sued, and then there's a funny Politico article that speculated. I don't know if you saw this. Did you see this?
I don't think so.
Yeah, that speculated that there was a bill in California, a state bill that was basically put forward, and all that it would do was make it illegal in California to transition a nonprofit to a for-profit. So it was pretty specifically aimed at legally preventing Altman from doing what he wanted to do.
Just coincidentally, as OpenAI was planning to do just that.
Exactly. Well, I mean, it was clear. Nobody made any bones that it was about preventing this. But then people started poking into it, and a lot of the language was very similar to sort of the language that Musk's lawyers had used. So there was some speculation that Musk was sort of behind lobbying for this bill directly that would have made it illegal. So he's really went all in on that. But independently of that, there was questions in Delaware and elsewhere in California about whether or not you could legally do this, make this kind of a transition. So there's pressure from Musk, pressure from the public, pressure from the AI community, and it ultimately sort of collapsed. And I don't know ultimately if it really changes the state of play all that much. The one thing that I do want to say is there are some really smooth-brained people out there going well, this shows that OpenAI is dedicated to, its mission of providing AI that's beneficial.
My God.
And it's
give me a break.
You fool, you absolute moron. They tried to do this for years and years. They spent millions in legal fees. They waged a public campaign to try to get this to go, and they were basically thwarted. So they were forced not to be able to do it. Now they're going to maybe have to leave a little money on the table. Although who knows? The legal structure is so weird. They can probably do whatever they want with it.
Well, I feel like one of the fascinating pieces of this story, before we move on to these bigger AI stories that we wanted to get into, is the fact that, okay, OpenAI is not going to do this private restructuring, is going to keep its kind of nonprofit status, still do some tweaks with that. But Microsoft, which is, kind of OpenAI's biggest benefactor, and also benefits a lot from the relationship that it has with OpenAI, from the money that is put into it, at least as we're talking on Wednesday, does not seem to be on board with what OpenAI is planning to do. And there was some reporting in the Information on Tuesday that says that under the current deal, Microsoft basically gets 20% of OpenAI's revenue through 2030. But apparently, based on some things that, Sam Altman has been talking about and some documents that the information got access to, it looks like they're planning to actually reduce the amount that commercial partners like Microsoft get to only 10% by 2030, which you could understand Microsoft might be a bit annoyed about.
Right. Yeah. So exactly. So Microsoft hasn't signed off on this deal. It's not a done deal like this restructuring or whatever it is. But I think, the headline is that, OpenAI has relented in the face of this pressure. And, B, there are these questions about what the revenue structure even looks like, or this partnership with Microsoft looks like. The numbers that they cite, by the way, are so ridiculous. like what? It's like 100. They'll be making $170 billion a year by then, and they don't want to give Microsoft 20% of that.
Also, tell me how it gets from losing all this money to making all of that money. Maybe I'm not buying it.
Yeah. I guess I think it's looking at it now. OpenAI is talking about a social network. It's talking about embedding, links to like a shopping service. There's been talk about ads. So,
that's it. The competition between OpenAI and Meta to see who can make us talk to more AI chatbots through our social media experiences.
To cap out our friend limit of 15, so we can reach 15.
How many of which company's chatbots are going to be in our 15 friends list?
While you were talking, I was just imagining like what even looks like sitting there with are they each on a different device, or do you have like 15 windows open with like your two real friends and then 12 just different AI friends who are
no, you have your Vision Pro headset on and you're FaceTiming with people with their weird like Vision Pro avatar, and that makes it really easy to just sub in your AI people because they look the same way.
But you're in Meta's Horizon worlds, and no one has legs still. Yeah. No one has the legs. Yeah, that's one direction that we made that the companies apparently want us to go in. But
it's such an exciting future.
Exciting future. Yeah. But if we want to talk about like the exciting present, like what is actually happening because of AI right now, then
the not so exciting present.
As with a lot of this stuff, sometimes it's hard to peel away the moral panic from like the genuine wrecking ball of that AI is posing. But I think I've seen enough on two fronts at least to say that like we're in big trouble unless we don't sort of organize and push back. And the first is this story that's sort of went all over the place from New York Magazine about AI and higher ed, and it's called "Everyone is Cheating Their Way Through College." And ChatGPT has unraveled the entire academic project. And once in a while, a story like this or an essay like this will go around, and a lot of it does. I mentioned the moral panic element because some of them kind of do have like a kids these days kind of aura, I guess, in the air but it's also just like indisputable that it's disastrous for public learning. I mean, in this story, that talks to a lot of people who just like do all of their work with ChatGPT. Most students are using it at least a little bit. They're using it to write essays. They're using it, to find answers. They're using it as, information resources. They don't understand the output that it's generating. I mean, obviously they find the reporter, James D. Walsh, found some extreme cases. A guy who went to college uses ChatGPT for everything and even built his own tool to sort of help other students cheat at coding as well as just regular tests. And he's quoted as saying, something like, they're like, well, why, if you just want to, the reporter asked him, like, why did you even go to college if you wanted to do all this stuff? And he's like, well, it's the best place to meet a future partner and a future startup co-founder.
Oh my God.
That's why he went to college. Obviously this is an extreme case, but my partner,
you have to go to college. That's the only place where you can potentially find the Facebook.
Yeah, or found the next plagiarism generator.
Yeah.
As these, I mean, he founded another startup that helps coders pass these tests that the tech companies like to sort of give new recruits to test their coding and capacity. And it's hard to cheat on it, or it was apparently. So he created basically a chat GPT to beat coding test software.
It's a bit funny to me that like in a few years, all of these tech companies are going to have resulted in churning out all these coders who can't really code because they were cheating on all their tests with ChatGPT and these other like generative AI tools.
Right. They just like don't have the knowledge base, or they won't.
Yeah.
And
how did you do in university? Oh, I got great marks. Oh, fantastic. We can't wait to welcome you to the team.
Yeah, there's a kernel of absolute truth to that, because there are going to be fewer people who actually sort of understand the actual composition of code, how to write code, and we're going to be coasting on a lot of stuff that's sort of good enough. And as I was saying, like my partner is a professor. She's a teacher at a university, and she sees this stuff all the time, and it has become just an undeniable sort of fact of life in academia that you deal with students who are submitting AI generated work, and as this story points out, a lot of times like they clearly have not even read the output that they haven't. I mean, a lot of the line has been like, okay, nothing's going to put the genie back in the bottle, so you can use the tool as long as you're responsibly editing and of course they're not. Of course, like a lot of kids are not doing it. So I do think like I think this like really does create a real crisis for knowledge production, for education, for learning. I do think that it is still maybe, if not then one of the most sort of use cases for ChatGPT and for AI in general.
Yeah. Well, you can even see like the usage drop off once the academic year in North America and Europe ends, right?
Yeah. Because they're not generating essays and term papers anymore.
Exactly. Yeah. Like that is notable in the ChatGPT like usage data, like, or at least it has been in years past. We'll see if it continues this year.
Well, yeah, and notably, they're OpenAI and the AI companies are encouraging this. If they just during finals season, they famously made their paid tier of ChatGPT free for all college students. So they're saying plug in, get addicted to this stuff. And honestly, like you don't want to be a conspiracy theorist. You don't want to, but like this is what it would look like if they were saying, get addicted to the idea of just, generating your output without any friction, without any critical thought, without any difficulty. Here's a case that, you may be judged for, and it's difficult, and it can get the job done. And then once that's sort of beaten into your brain, you're going to probably take, ChatGPT out of the classroom and into the rest of your life, because you find use cases to apply it to. So it's really stamping, it's making people reliant on using these systems. And, a lot of the scientists who study this stuff have called, relying on these systems cognitive offloading, where you're not doing the work yourself to work through critical problems. Instead, you're just relying on machines. The term was coined to look at what people were doing with Google search, and now ChatGPT has accelerated the process. So yeah, I think that it's both a savvy and distressing tactic for, OpenAI to go after the education market, because it absolutely is slackening away our critical thought, our capacity for critical thought. I think you found a great quote from a friend of the show, Chris Gilliard, who commented on this, right?
Yeah, basically he was pulling a quote out of the piece from a poet, philosopher, and Cal State Chico ethics professor, Troy Jollymore. And he said, massive numbers of students are going to emerge from university with degrees and into the workforce who are essentially illiterate, both in the literal sense and in the sense of being historically illiterate and having no knowledge of their own culture, much less anyone else's. And I think, when we hear the word illiterate, sometimes we can think, these people can read, like, what are you talking about? But the point about being literate is not just being able to know what the words mean, but being able to like understand the context and like being able to actually work with those words and have a greater understanding of what is going on there. And I think we have seen over time in our societies that there has been this kind of like reduction in people's capacity to actually understand like the larger meanings of the types of things that they're hearing, the types of things that they're encountering. And I think based on the story, I had kind of like two bigger thoughts, right? Maybe to put it in even greater context than we've been talking about, where I feel like on the one hand, it takes advantage of this broader restructuring that we've seen in higher education that's more focused on grades. And, as we've seen, like the university itself get remade into more of like a business and less of a site of kind of critical knowledge and critical thinking and those sorts of things. And more just like, are you going to get the grades to get your marks, to get your degree and blah, blah, blah. Right. And so there's been that transformation that we've seen. And I feel like ChatGPT really helps to play into that, where it's like, are you going to get the grade on your final? Are you going to, pass your class? Whatever. We'll help you to do that. You don't need to actually understand the content of what is going on there. And unfortunately, the university as a whole has been transformed to the degree where like there is less focus on that anyway, because of the pressures that have come from, the kind of commercialization of the university system. And then the other piece of that is like you were saying earlier, it can also often seem like a kind of like moral panic sort of a thing when we talk about, social media being bad, or, the generative AI tools being bad or something like that. But for me, I feel like it just fits into this much longer process of like dumbing down the population through television and through social media and through like all of these developments that have kind of layered one on top of the other, that have made it so that people just are not engaging with knowledge in the way that they used to have to, because of the form in which it was available. And it's like, it's not even to blame like the citizenry and people for living in the world that we have. It's like, because we have allowed companies to reshape the world in the way that it is, and because I would argue that there are political actors who want to see the population become dumber and, more open to falling for particular things, that, ChatGPT is not the one thing that has changed it all, but is like another thing that further adds to and accelerates this bigger problem that we have been dealing with for decades, and that there are like powerful interests in society that want to see move forward, right? The kind of cable news, and news being more like entertainment than actual reporting on what is going on. And, all of these larger transformations that we have seen that just kind of pile on top of one another, that lead to the point where, like that professor is saying, we have so much more of the population that is not functionally literate in the way that we would have expected in decades past.
Yeah, I mean, just look at sort of where we're at right now, where AI is just starting to like get its hooks in. A big factor in Trump's reelection was that he was more popular among all of these podcasts and the Joe Rogan set and the alt-right, where they've like, really taken root in these like information poor environments where, you watch some of this stuff, and that even Joe Rogan's a great example. Like, he barely holds ideas in his head for, longer than the length of a podcast episode, certainly, maybe not even that. And just, he's always kind of going, well, and then like truth is just this perpetually malleable thing that just kind of like wafts around. No one gets challenged. And these, new forces that have marshaled a lot of control, in part by building these platforms, the CEOs of the tech companies and the political actors savvy enough to realize that they are the best allies to cultivate, have benefited immensely. And so you look at that on the one hand, the degradation of the journalism industry. So fact poor is all out. We're seeing all that like being automated or put into contention by AI at this very moment, where the ground has been laid for these fire hoses of like dubious AI generated content where nothing really needs to be true. And who benefits from that? The current ruling class, who's literally in power in Washington right now, guys like Elon Musk, who are then sort of instituting this same logic, these same ideas to animate a project like Doge, and then say, okay, well, we don't need, actual public servants anymore. We don't need actual federal scientists anymore. We don't need people who are like actually sort of tasked with generating good information about reality anymore, because we have AI. Because we can just feed that.
Who needs to actually understand how systems and different sectors and different aspects of the public service and all these types of things work? We are the genius tech people. We can just transform it all, right? Like, I feel like there's a kernel of what we've been talking about in the broader tech approach, where it's like, we don't need to have knowledge. We don't need to understand how so many parts of society work. we are tech people. We are smarter than everybody else. We can just transform it.
We can figure it out, or we can write a program that will figure it out, or
Yeah.
we can, exactly. And like, I think this brings us
Or
to
all these people who do have knowledge are actually dumb and don't understand because we are the brilliant geniuses who understand everything.
Yeah.
Because we can code.
And
Yeah.
and they're using that logic, like as we speak, as we all know, and we talked about it a million times on this podcast, to tear up, the federal government and replace it with sort of lackeys and AI chatbots. And that this feeds directly into sort of the thing that I wanted to touch on, which is a piece that I wrote in the newsletter that kind of blew up, just not because it was like the hardest I've ever worked on an article, but anyone who's ever written an article online knows you don't get to pick which ones kind of blow up. But anyways, I wrote this piece that argues that like the AI jobs crisis is here right now, and the crisis, I think, it is linked directly to everything we were just talking about to what's happening in higher education. And it's not that like there's a billion jobs about to just disappear because AI can take them, but
Exactly.
it's about these particular corporate and big tech actors being able to use this logic to ram it into very different orifices and to justify changing, degrading, or sometimes, eliminating jobs that, I think most people would argue are valuable to a society. And so to kick the piece off, I spoke with a former Duolingo writer. Last week, I think we mentioned in the pod and in one of our short stories that Duolingo had announced that it was embracing an AI first sort of strategy and that it would be gradually winding down its contractors. And I heard from a former Duolingo contractor who reached out and said, that's not exactly true. They're not gradually doing it. They have already done it. They are replacing us with AI. That's exactly what they're doing.
Meanwhile, they announced not long after that they were rolling out all these additional languages with the help of AI, right?
With AI, yeah. And these contractors had been pulled off their previous jobs, which was to write the quizzes, write the content, sort of give Duolingo that quirky voice that people really like.
The voice of the owl.
The voice of the owl. The owl hoots no more. Anyways, they were pulled off writing to train, the AI system, and then they were unceremoniously fired en masse. Estimate like 100 people all, at once. And this is happening in various, especially creative fields. It's difficult because it's not showing up in like the jobs data because writers, artists, copywriters, these are not like the largest sections of the economy, and they are already largely precarious and freelance and difficult to sort of keep good data on in things like the census data or the Bureau of Labor Statistics data. So we already sort of are at a disadvantage in tabulating what's really going on. But I think my argument is that we've gotten to the point where it's unignorable that these changes are happening. I have sources as well as friends who are illustrators and writers who've had their work completely wiped out because companies are using Midjourney instead of hiring graphic designers, hiring illustrators, hiring artists, and that's just indisputably happening. And then we see the logic being applied to Doge, and this is an AI first strategy, even though AI is almost secondary. They were going to do it whether or not they wanted to, but it's more the imperative, the logic, the empowerment that generative AI lends this entire project.
And the justification it provides to do it as well, right? This is why I think stories like yours are so important, because they actually help us to understand what is really happening, right? It goes beyond the bullshit that we're hearing from the Sam Altmans and the OpenAI's and, the other, AI people about, on the one hand, how AI is going to transform the world in all these good ways, but also on the other hand, how, it's going to wipe out all these jobs or be a threat to humanity or whatever. The writing that you're doing shows us what is actually happening on the ground, what the real impact of AI is. And this is like an example I give all the time, right? I always say to people, look at what they said about AI back in the mid 2010s and what AI was supposedly going to do then and what it didn't do. It didn't wipe out all those jobs, but it led to algorithmic management. It led to these changes in the way that work was performed that reduced the power of workers in their workplaces. And That's exactly what they are trying to do here as well. It's just taking a slightly different form, and we need to understand what that form is if we're to be able to properly understand it, but then use that understanding to really push back against it. And that's what a story like yours is doing, is it's giving us that picture so we know what is really happening here.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I think, as I argue in the piece, the crisis is not anything that looks like a Skynet jobs apocalypse. The crisis is in this pro-corporate restructuring of the very nature of work and what we deem, as a society important, and where we can put that value, who gets compensated for what. And it's being tilted in favor of Silicon Valley, of Fortune 500 companies, of the oligarchs, and away from, public service, art, writing, journalism, things that aim to serve the public good. These disciplines and fields that were already, long under attack before generative AI reared its head, but that industry has now found a new tool that is quite powerful and quite useful for squeezing all of those fields I just mentioned. But before we move on, I want to add that, I heard from so many people after I published this piece. It has become the most popular article that I've published on my newsletter, I think, or just about. It was covered a lot of different places and in a lot of different ideologically oriented enterprises. But I started hearing from a lot of people. I heard from, designers, video game artists. I heard from people who work for marketing departments, all different folks, people who have seen AI come into their workplace. And I mentioned the late, great anthropologist David Graeber's book, Bullshit Jobs, in the piece to kind of point out that I think we will probably see more bullshit jobs and fewer good ones, and how the AI trend is exacerbating a tension that he points out in his book of how people who have these bullshit jobs feel animosity towards people who have good jobs, and it creates this this sort of structure that's deeply misaligned, where we're taught to sort of devalue good work, or to feel resentful of people who are doing creative work or work that's in the public service, because there is so much of the bullshit. Anyways, he started his project by soliciting examples from people who do have bullshit jobs, who they themselves consider themselves to have bullshit jobs. So I wanted to do the same thing, keep this train running, and sort of maybe formalize this process. And so I have logged an encrypted email address called AIKilledMyJob@pm.me. It's a Proton Mail account, and I would love to hear from people who have had AI pushed into their workplace, who have seen their job conditions erode because of a manager using AI, or who've been replaced by AI outright, or who have friends replaced by AI outright. Because I think this trend is more pervasive than the economic data lets on. It's something, it's a restructuring. It's not a mass figure based hypothesis here. And I want to hear these stories, and I think we can generate some solidarity from them. And right now I just want to talk to people. I want to hear what's going on. I've already heard probably, over a dozen stories just from publishing this story. So let's see if we can't find some common ground here and locate some ways to maybe push back on the whole trend. So yeah, if you have a story, it's AIKilledMyJob@pm.me. Share your stories if you have them, or if you'd like to. I will keep your identity anonymous if you'd like. Again, it's an encrypted email. So just putting that out there.
Well, Brian, don't tell anybody, but I heard that Google is making AI-generated podcasts, and they're coming for us too.
We're next. We're next. We have to build those parasocial relationships with, or maybe we can.
Maybe the AIs will do that too. They'll be their new friends and their new podcast.
Can we get 12 new AI friends to join us on our podcast? Oh wait, excuse me, 13. So we have 15.
Yeah. Oh my. Well, I think we should get to the final stories of the week. What do you think?
I think let's do it.
So first up, there's new reporting in Bloomberg based on data from the National Automobile Associations in various countries on how Tesla is doing. And, I think we talked about this on the show probably last month or the month before sometime about the decline in sales. Well, in Europe, those sales continued to slide in April, where you saw countries like France seeing a 59% drop year over year in Tesla sales. UK, it was down 62%. In Sweden, down 81%. The number of Tesla sales in April compared to April of last year. So, this trend of people being turned off buying Teslas, this brand being toxic, has not changed. And I think Tesla is going to continue to struggle there. And I'm excited to see numbers from other countries coming out as well.
You love to see it.
Absolutely. What do you got for us, Brian?
We have word that the funding, I think $23 million that was previously allocated to PBS Kids to create some non-commercial learning-focused programming. Parents of kids know PBS Kids. Anybody who has young ones likely has used the PBS Kids app. Maybe even there's this funky little PBS Kids handheld sort of tablet type device that only had PBS Kids. Such is the desire for people to escape, YouTube and all of this. But anyways, the Trump administration has gutted the funding for PBS Kids, and they're pushing back right now. But it's just such a reflection to me of this moment, right, where all the trends that we've been talking about. YouTube Kids is maybe marginally better than YouTube regular, but parents will know it's still filled with just weird schlocky stuff and ads. And so the tiny little bulwark we had against this charming, publicly funded PBS Kids programming has now been yanked by the Trump administration at the moment that tech power is higher than ever.
That's it. He's making the girls only have $3 or $4 or $5 instead of $100 or whatever, and now he's taking away the PBS Kids as well.
He's taking away their TV shows too. Yeah, we just have to watch AI generated Peppa the Pig now instead of.
That's the future, right? Everyone keeps saying that's the future. So,
all right, what do you got?
Apple, releases its new iPhones in September, October of every year. Well, there's a new report that this year it might be releasing a folding phone. For what reason? I have no idea. I guess to try to, release a new gimmick to get people to buy some stuff. But along with that, this report suggests that the base iPhone 18, which will be, the number of the ones that will be released in the fall, won't actually be released alongside the more expensive versions and is going to be pushed into the spring of next year, basically to force people who need new phones to buy a more expensive one instead of being able to get the base model. I think it's just a reflection of what Apple has been doing for a long time to try to get people to buy more expensive things, adding more options and all that kind of stuff. But I do think it's kind of despicable. They already released the iPhone SE, or now they call it the 16E, I believe, in that time of year. And now they need to push the base model as well, just to try to get people to spend a little bit more on an iPhone. I don't know. It's just really disgusting to me.
Tell us how you really feel, Paris.
Yeah, but very reflective of modern Apple, I think. All right, what do you got, Brian?
I'm going to do two very quickly back to back. Number one, this is just too funny. Google launches a movie production initiative for an anti-Black Mirror take on tech, according to Matt Binder at Mashable. So in order to rebut all of these dystopian narratives that are running amok in our culture for who knows why, I can't imagine why anyone would have any negative sentiments about Google or any of the other big tech companies right now. They're going to start a TV show and movie initiative called 100 Zeros, and they are going to pay artists and TV producers to make an anti-Black Mirror shows about the future that are positive, that put a positive spin on this. So good luck to anyone. I'm very much looking forward to echo my friend Ingrid Burrington on Blue Sky. Very curious to see who decides to help Google with its propaganda effort. And one reason that it may need such propaganda efforts is because of real life Black Mirror stories like this one, as ABC 15 in Arizona reports a family has used AI to create video for a deadly Chandler road rage victim's own impact statement. In other words, the family of a victim of a road rage incident, very tragic, man, was shot in a road rage dispute in 2001. As part of the case in the closing statements, that's when the road rage incident was. So it wound through the courts for years and years and years. Yeah. And the family used AI to create a digital likeness of the man who was killed to issue a statement. Why don't we just play just a brief clip of it? It's only 10 seconds here.
It is a shame we encountered each other that day in those circumstances. In another life, we probably could have been friends. I believe in forgiveness and in God who forgives. I always have, and I still do.
I love that AI. Thank you for that.
And as you can hear, the judge responded to this quite favorably. He liked the AI, and he gave the state, which had asked for 9.5 years of prison time for the offender, he added an extra year on there. So moved he was by the AI video.
The AI video that was talking about forgiveness.
Right.
Got him to give the guy an extra year. Yeah.
I just, as I said, when I posted this, I was just like, I don't even know where to begin with this. Here we are, 2025. Hooray.
Great. You love to see it. Yeah. I was shocked when you sent this one over, to be honest. Like,
I know it takes a lot to
never in a million years is that something that would have came into my mind to do. But yeah, fascinating. Okay. Well, the final thing I just wanted to talk about this week is not even really a story necessarily, or maybe it is something that should have been a story, but rather was not. That's how I feel about it. So people might not, remember, but way back in 1995, there was a public backbone to the internet that existed at that time that was run by the NSF, the National Science Foundation, I believe it's called. And, it was decommissioned at that time. And basically, a lot of people who look at that moment consider that act to be the real representation of the privatization of the internet, when this was really properly handed over to the private sector. And so, April 30th, 1995, 30 years from that was April 30th of this year. And, I think that we're in a moment where we're really grappling with the consequences of decisions that were made 30 years ago that have created the internet, the tech industry, all of the issues that have come along with it that we're now grappling with today. And so for me, I was a bit surprised to see that no major tech publication, at least as far as I've seen at the moment, has bothered to even mark the fact that this anniversary was had, or to think about, to have some kind of like retrospective or reflection on, what decisions made in that moment mean for what has happened today. I'm personally working on a series about that for Tech Won't Save Us. I was hoping to have it out for the end of April, but have just been really busy, so it's not done yet. So I will be trying to, give people an idea of how we should think about that moment, or maybe kind of reframe how we think about it. But I was surprised that these more resourced publications, these publications that do often look back at key events in history when they come up, didn't seem to think that the 30th anniversary of, the decommissioning of the public backbone of the internet was something worth marking and thinking about.
Yeah, I'm glad you're doing it, because it is, you tend to see the anniversaries for the iPhone and for, big more Silicon Valley and corporate flavored milestones. I'm guilty of that. My book about the iPhone was released quite consciously on the 10th anniversary that the iPhone came out.
How dare you, Brian? Yeah.
I guess I'll have to make my next book about the
That's
public
it. We're coming up to
backbone.
the 20th, a few years away, right?
There we go. Round 2.
Yeah, that's it. Updated edition then. Anyway, a wild week with all this AI news. It never stops.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think you can trace the public backbone of the internet being dissolved, or an internet that was held by the public, informed by more public choices, or at least the vision of one being broken down and sold off to corporate players. I think you can trace a pretty clean line from there. the dissolution of the public interest internet to where we are now, an internet that has given rise to many generations of opportunistic content generation and monopolies corralling what we see on the internet, and then finally cannibalizing everything that has been produced on it into a nonstop stream of AI generated slop and layering it over everything else in a nonstop corporatization of our entire experience of the internet. So yeah, I'm glad you brought it up.
I could not agree more. It's a grim topic to look at, but that's what it feels like every week on this show, unfortunately.
But we have a good time. We have a good time though, don't we?
That's why we do this, right? Enjoy the grim reality
Yes, we're
that we
deranged.
face at the moment. Yeah. Oh my. But, we'll return next week to look at it again. System Crash is hosted by Paris Marks and Brian Merchant. Production is by Eric Wickham. Our theme music is Dystopia by our good friends in Yacht. Support the show on patreon.com/systemcrashpod to get a monthly bonus episode. Thanks for listening.